will launch a massive grassroots campaign against this right-wing recall effort. And make no mistake, our opponents don't just want a do-over of the election, they would like a do-over of the historic Amazon tax, of all the landmark renters' rights victories we have already won, of the historic $15 minimum wage, of every victory working people have won in Seattle over the last 6 years.
You're hearing there the words of Councilmember Kshama Sawant from Seattle from a few months ago as the recall effort against her got underway. Now here we are in early January. We are expecting to hear an important decision from the state Supreme Court in her case. That story and so much more ahead here on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, the podcast that's ready to take a polar plunge into Seattle area politics as we start 2021. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel. The views expressed here are my own, and my co-host is a man who needs no introduction, but I'm going to do it anyway, the exciting and talented Kevin Schofield of Seattle City Council Insight. Hello, Kevin.
Hey, Brian.
Yeah, here we go, man. Once again, back into the breach. I'll give a shout once again to City Grind Espresso, the background noise sponsor for the audio podcast. That, of course, the coffee stand on the first floor of Seattle City Hall. It's closed during the pandemic. Their location at the Henry Art Gallery is open, however, for takeout. Help them out, folks. Help other small businesses, too. Thanks also to our patrons on Patreon for helping us keep this show going into the new year. Really proud of what we've been able to do here. We do need your support, though, of local independent journalism to keep this thing going. So please do become a patron. We've got some special gifts for you if you want to support us here in the new year. We'll be talking about that in the weeks ahead. And finally, thanks to Converge Media for the video version of our podcast. It's on their YouTube channel Wednesday nights at 6 o'clock. Let's get going with right here, right now. Okay, so a big date ahead, January 7th, as the state Supreme Court is set to take up the Councilmember Sawant recall issue. Kevin, I want to break down some of these charges facing Councilmember Sawant with the idea in mind that the court is not saying these charges are true or not. Important to point this out. That's for the voters. But rather, is there evidence to support the charges? Are the charges legally sufficient to justify a recall? So 4 charges here: delegating personnel decisions to the Socialist Alternative Party, using city resources to promote a ballot initiative, the tax Amazon measure specifically there, occupying City Hall, where she used her passkey back in June to rally protesters, and leading a protest to Mayor Jenny Durkin's house also in June. I know there's a lot to wade through here, Kevin, but in looking at this, which charges, if any of these 4, stand out to you as having the most legal merit from the court's perspective?
Well, I think, again, with the caveat you gave that the court isn't going to look at whether it's true or not. They just have to look at assuming the facts and evidence that are asserted are true. Do those facts, meet the legal standard for saying that this could be true? Mm-hmm. And then does that legal standard meet the requirement for recalling an elected official? Because you can't just recall an elected official for anything, right?
Yeah, there's got to be some malfeasance going on. Yeah,
and from that point of view, they could say yes to all 4 of them.
Yeah.
On the other hand, the biggest question that Councilmember Sawant and her attorney have tried to raise on this is, part of the standard which is whether the official was actually trying to, knowingly violate the law.
Yes, right.
And she keeps saying, Councilmember Sawant, didn't know that this is in violation of the law, or didn't intend to violate the law.
Yeah.
And while the petitioners are saying, well, she was aware of the law and she took this action, so therefore, the voters should be able to infer that she did this with full intention.
Right. And
it's not, it's not like she accidentally did this.
Right. That's the key here. And I think it's difficult not to compare this to the Durkin recall effort that happened a short while ago. The court threw it out last year. And the Sawant campaign is going to be talking about that. I know Sawant herself back in the fall pointed out that John McKay, former U.S. attorney, that's one of the lawyers for the recall effort, is a good friend of Jenny Durkin's here. But I thought you really made an important point on SCC Insight about this a few weeks ago. The court tossed out this recall case against Mayor Jenny Durkin. That case revolved around something she did not do in terms of protecting the people of Seattle against during police protests. But this case against Sawant really focuses on things she did do, allegedly. Can the court apply the same standards with the Sawant case as they did in the Durkin case? This is an interesting point here.
Yeah, and certainly Sawant's attorneys are trying to argue about that, and
Yeah.
it's a question of discretion, right? You can't recall an elected official for discretionary act, right? For something that it's within their powers to decide whether to do it or not. And in the case of the recall of the mayor that was proposed, she did not take action to further curtail SPDs use of crowd control weapons, or to personally take control over SPD, which
Right.
city charter allows her to do,
Mm-hmm.
but doesn't force her to
Correct.
do.
Right.
Right. And now, so these are cases instead with Councilmember Sawant, where, as you mentioned, she did specific things. And now the question is, and some of them, she's still arguing those are discretionary acts, and you can't, you can't recall somebody for that. But, we'll see what the court says. We'll see. I mean, I think there's going to be, I think there's going to be some interesting precedents that come out of this.
Yeah.
Now, what is likely to happen this week is we'll probably, if this follows the same pattern as Mayor Durkin, they will probably issue a very short ruling.
Okay.
This week, and say the full opinion will be forthcoming, and then it may be as much as like a month, or maybe even a little longer than that, before we get the full opinion. Right. So, we shouldn't expect a full explanation this week on it.
Right. But we will hear a few things potentially that could shape this, because we're talking about some timelines here, Kevin. Of course, if the court does allow this to go forward, to get on the April election ballot, at least, petitioners would need about 10,000 signatures or so, and the deadline for submitting them is February 26th. Now, if they miss that, there's other things they could do here, but I'm really looking at that date as an important part in this, aren't you?
Yeah, it is a very important date in this. And, if they miss that, then they could potentially, make the May date and get on the August primary ballot, which will be interesting, right?
Little crowded potentially there.
This is the local, and that could play, to their advantage. That could get more people, actually participating in, or, that could, depending on how it goes, it could play to either side's advantage if they think that having more voters or less voters will play to their advantage. My guess is Councilmember Sawant's campaign would think that it would play to her advantage to have fewer voters, because she has a very mobilized base. Right. Although overall polling for city council members, including Councilmember Sawant, are very low. Right. So if there's large turnout, that could arguably play very much against the council member in a recall election.
That is that's going to be very interesting there. If she's actually pushing to get this thing going more quickly.
And then the flip side of that is that there's an argument to be made for stalling, really they've been trying to do, dragging this out, so that there's more distance between the actions that Councilmember Sawant took that are the basis of the recall and when voters actually have to vote on it.
Yeah. Wow. It's going to be one that we're going to continue to track here, folks. Both sides already kind of bolstering their war chest for this. $148,000. As I've seen so far for the Kshama Solidarity Campaign, $223,000 for recall Sawant here in the early
and
part.
In fact, I just heard from the recall campaign, they say they now have over $250,000.
Wow. Okay.
And then there's debate back and forth as to how many District 3 supporters on both sides. The Sawant campaign has been criticized because a lot of their money is coming from not only outside of District 3, but outside of the city of Seattle as a whole. And they've recently been pushing back in their campaign materials, saying that that they have way more District 3 contributors than the campaign. And the recall campaign has come back now and said, we've actually got twice as many as the Kshama Solidarity campaign, but most of them are under $25.
Right.
So their name and address aren't actually listed.
That's there's some grassroots efforts on both sides there. So I want to make sure that we move on to another point here, Kevin, because this week the council is set to pass an ordinance in this first full week of January to boost the subpoena powers of the Office of Public Accountability and the Office of the Inspector General for Public Safety. The OPA reviews police misconduct. The OIG audits police management and policies of the Seattle Police Department, both of these civilian-led groups at the heart of this. Kevin, we reported on this last month when Councilmember Lisa Herbold and Mayor Durkin brought this up, this idea to give the OPA and the OIG more authority to subpoena civilians in cases of officer misconduct. And that really does sound important. I think it is. But then you look at the city's current contract with the Police Officers Guild, which says this has to be negotiated. And where the contract and city ordinance conflict, the contract there is the controlling authority. So I'm trying to figure out what impact is passing this ordinance really going to have.
Well, it's a start. I think there's a couple of pieces of this that are happening in parallel. One is the city is continuing to try to, get out from under the consent decree and get to a better place with that. Right now, the pieces of it are, the pieces of the car engine are, spread all over the garage floor after the event of this last year. They're really trying to put that back together again. And this is one piece that's been outstanding for a while, is to try to deal with, with one of these issues. And I think, another part of this is, as you mentioned, there's another round of bargaining come out.
Yeah.
So we're now into January. So the SPD is actually, and their line officers are actually operating without a contract again.
It officially expired at the end of the year.
SPA contract expired on December 31st. So, and they're supposed to be headed back to the bargaining table. And the mayor and city council actually seem to be moving in the same direction for once on this now. Where
which is important.
They've aligned on, they've really started to align on bargaining strategy around this, and making, we saw some announcements late last year that they're going to make sure that OPA and Office of Inspector General and CDC actually have representation at sitting at the table. And you can see them working to try to build up enough political capital to really put pressure on SPOG
during these negotiations.
Otherwise, SPOG might not need to concede on anything. At the same time, they're also working in Olympia. We've got a legislative session there that starts in a couple weeks, and they're on their priority list. There is some changes to state law that would decrease in some ways the leverage that SPOG has in negotiations,
or other police unions at that matter too. So I know one final piece to this, Kevin, just in looking at this, ultimately the DOJ, Judge Robart is going to have to be involved too, and that's an important piece of this as well. The judge really said in 2018, when the council passed its police accountability measure there, that he was very concerned about this police accountability piece. And and in looking at that, do we have to wait for these negotiations to go through before the DOJ starts getting involved, or what do you see there?
Well, so it's written into this ordinance that's getting passed that the terms, it says there are subject to the bargaining agreement limitations, right? So it does need, they're admitting up front that it needs to be bargained. My guess is Robart will say the same thing that, he said before. If this gets in front of him before, contract negotiations are finalized, he'll say, I'm not going to weigh in on this until you finish contract negotiations. Because I don't know what this means. Until then.
Well, a lot still ahead on this story that's connected to our next discussion topic here too. So let's move on to Now Hear This. Okay, so this is where we usually play a soundbite from the past week or so and break it down. In this case, I'm going to play one of the videos referred to in Judge Jones' recent ruling regarding the use of so-called less lethal crowd control weapons by Seattle police. So this is from September, what you're about to hear and see, around the Seattle Police Officers Guild headquarters in Soto. This is what the judge found as an indiscriminate use of a blast ball. If you're sensitive to this type of video or this type of sound, fair warning, I'm going to play it for our listeners and our viewers right now.
Yeah, I'm good.
Kevin, I'm bringing this up because this week, it's scheduled at least, the OPA, the OIG, and the CPC, the Community Police Commission, are scheduled to give some feedback to the SPD by January 8th on revising the police department's use of force policies. We talked about this last month, Kevin. The CPC was upset with some of these policies as they were laid out. What do you think the SPD is going to hear by January 8th? And more importantly, what do you think they're going to do about it?
Well, so just before they took their 2-week recess, Councilmember Herbold, the public safety chair for the city council, actually held a committee meeting, and invited all these folks to the table together, and had her staff put together a chart that shows sort of on the key issues where they're on the same page and where they're on different pages. And I think what SPD is going to be hearing is going to be very similar to that. And they're making at least some efforts towards getting public comment on
right. The public is allowed to do this too. That's right.
And so I'm guessing they're probably going to hear very similar things from them. And you know, the public is very much divided on these sorts of things, right? There's a set of, you know, residents and business owners who really want to see the police be able to crack down on protests, and particularly, you know, ones that are causing violence and property destruction. And at the same time, there's, you know, very valid concerns being raised about over-policing and about misuse of crowd control weapons by the police at First Amendment protected events.
Of course.
So, you know, I'm sure SPD is going to hear strong views from both ends on that. And, you know, at the end of the day, it really gets down to, you know, some very difficult details, right? You know, when, if ever, are blast balls allowed? Right. Can
pepper
crowd
spray,
control, can crowd control weapons be used to push crowds in specific directions? What are the rules around making sure that they're actually places for, you know, if they're dispersing a crowd before they use crowd control, you know, weapons on that crowd, have they verified that there are in fact avenues for the crowd to disperse? Right. And, you know, and the biggest issue is, what do you do when you have a very small number of disruptive people in a large peaceful crowd? Right. Because that is a real tactic that some of these more disruptive elements are taking, right?
Hiding behind those.
They're inserting themselves into the middle of a larger peaceful crowd and causing trouble from there. Right. And that's incredibly difficult for the police to deal with.
And just in following up on that point, I've just heard from so many different people connected to this that the SPD is trying to do what essentially no other police agency in the country has figured out here: how to create this policy that respects constitutional rights. That's very important, protects lives, protects property. I'm saying this not to diminish the effort, but just trying to figure this out and getting some real consensus on this is not going to be easy. This is going to be a huge process for the council going forward.
And especially for SPD right now, as they've lost so much trust in the community. Right. You know, a lot of this really comes down to kind of this visceral notion of, do you trust SPD with these less lethal weapons? Right. You know, and they're not, you know, not lethal. Right. They can be lethal. Absolutely. In some circumstances. Right. They're less lethal than using a gun. Right. Or potentially a baton. Right. And they were introduced explicitly into SPD's policy manual through the consent decree process.
That's right.
As a particular means of de-escalation. Right.
That's
to give the police options that they're required to use. That are short of lethal weapons.
This is not a new debate. The SPD and CPC, other groups, have been talking about this for many years.
But if we can't trust them to use them responsibly, then we have a big problem, right? And that in some ways is the heart of this debate right now. Is and SPD has, you know, really undermined their own case in a lot of ways in this last year. And, you know, from, you just showed one example of you know, video there, right? And there are lots of them. There are lots and lots.
Judge
some of them
Jones
are very clear and definitive, you know, one way or the other. And there's a lot of middle ground, right? That's just super gray about whether particular uses were appropriate or not.
Very, very difficult to sort that out. I wanted to touch on one other thing before we move on to our final piece here. This new year marks the announcement that the election cycle has begun, folks. You want to run for office, you may begin collecting democracy vouchers. So that's exciting here. Some familiar names have filed actually a while ago for council position 8 and 9. Alex Zimmerman in the mix. I have not missed his voice cursing at council members during meetings, but he has filed to run again. The names I'm seeing out there, Kevin, haven't raised any money, except in the case of Lance Randall from Southeast Seattle, filed to run for mayor last fall, has raised about $9,000. I'm bringing this up because I want to ask you, when do you expect to see these candidates for the mayor, Durkin, not running again, the position 8 and 9 on the council, the city attorney's office? When will those candidates start to pop up? What do you think?
I think we're going to see a bunch of them in the next week or two. And you know, some of it is, you know, getting into the new year, getting past the holidays, because, you know, the holidays are a bad time to do any announcements. Like that,
true.
Right. It just gets lost in all the holiday noise. So
yes,
we're past that now. So I think we're going to see that. And then, you know, at some level, there's going to be, at least for some of these races, there's a combination of a waiting game and, you know, and a preemption game, right? The waiting game is, you know, we know there are a couple of big players out there. We want to know, you know, everybody is dying to find out what Lorena Gonzalez and Teresa Mosqueda are going to do? Are they going to run for re-election for the positions that they already hold, or either, or maybe even both of them going to run for mayor?
Yeah.
Probably not both of them, but so, you know, I think a lot of people are waiting to see what they say.
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, there could be, you know, a mad rush to either of these positions, and, you know, particularly for mayor where it's just wide open, or if Gonzalez or Mosqueda decide to run for mayor, that leaves wide open one of the city council positions, right?
Yeah.
And so then there's a preemptive aspect of this where, you know, somebody with a big name, if they or even a, you know, mid-sized recognizable name, announces early, that could discourage other people who might be competitors from running.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
It's going to be interesting here. And I wanted to make sure I touched on this piece too. Campaigning and talking about this as we emerge from COVID. We're not there yet. It's important to point that out. This whole door-to-door technique that we've seen council candidates use over the past few years, I would imagine that's going to be curtailed here, hosting rallies, etc. How do candidates do this safely? Do you have any ideas about that? That's a real challenge, I think, ahead here.
I think it's going to be incredibly challenging and interesting to see. You know, we're going to see a lot of email campaigns. We're going to see probably, you know, a lot of online advertising on that. And then, you know, a lot of this, again, is going to depend on how quickly vaccines roll out.
Yeah.
And maybe, you know, it's a lot of noise and speculation, but it gets serious in May, right?
Yeah,
the primaries in August.
Yep.
The general election is November. And it may be by May, you know, we've got enough vaccines rolled out there that you know, these things can really start up in person again.
Yeah.
We'll just have to see what happens over the summer.
Yeah, and as it turns out, you have until May 21st to file to run for office with King County elections. So start your engines out there, folks. Can't wait to talk about you. Let's move on to our next segment here. What's next? Kevin, as we wrap up here, I wanted to talk about the restrictions from the governor on restaurants, gyms, etc. It looked like they could have been lifted on January 4th. Now it's January 11th. We'll see if that gets pushed again here. Our state, like so many others, has seen this surge in COVID cases following the holiday break. Kevin, do you see it as time to extend those restrictions yet again, for one? And also, what's the governor really balancing here when it comes to health concerns versus economic concerns? Let's talk about this.
Yeah. So the governor has already extended eviction moratoria to March 31st.
That's right.
And I think that's a clear signal of how he sees this playing out right now.
Yeah.
You know, looking at the you know, daily statistics for cases, right? The holidays has been difficult because a lot of the report, and a combination of the holidays and the fact that a lot of our hospital system and healthcare system is really overwhelmed at the moment.
Yes, right.
It's not in the state. We're not really sort of at the breaking point right now.
No,
but it's definitely a higher load than we've seen. Right?
Yeah.
So not as bad as California and some other places, but bad.
Yeah.
And at the state level, you know, what that means is that the daily statistics of the number of new cases, the reporting for that has just not been very consistent.
Been a challenge during the holidays.
There's days when there's no data at all.
Yeah.
You know, there's just, it's very volatile there. You know, it's been ranging over the last couple of weeks from 1,500 to 4,500 cases per day. So you know, if you kind of assume that, you know, there are some hospitals reporting a day later, 2 days later, something like that. If you look at kind of what's happening, you know, over the course of a week, it looks like it's settling in right around 2,000, 2,500 a day, but it's really hard to say at this point. And if we've actually plateaued at 2,000, 2,500 a day, I think the governor will have no choice but to extend it further. And the other big wild card in this is we have this new variant of coronavirus,
of COVID,
which is now in the U.S.
It's and in our state too.
It's almost certainly in our state. There isn't a lot of good data that says but it will. And you know what the latest research is saying on this is, you're just going back to, we've talked about R numbers a lot. Right. The R number for Washington State has been sort of just above 1. And if you think, like, you know, before we really got the good Thanksgiving data, it was looking like it was literally right around 1.
Right. And that R number, once again, is the
R number is it's a metric that reflects how much the virus is being passed on. So
Right.
literally it's like, if somebody has the virus, how many people are you expected to pass it on to?
That's right. Thank you.
So a number below 1 says that the population having it is decreasing because every person that has it passes it to less than 1 person.
Right.
If it's more than 1, then we're increasing.
Yep.
Right. In the earliest days, like early February, mid-February last year, R was somewhere in the 2 to 2.5 range.
Yes, right. So much.
And in the times like in the late spring when we really were getting it way down there, we had R below 1, and we saw a major reduction.
Things were looking
better.
It's
been sitting about 1 for a while.
Yeah.
This new variant, the UK data on this says that it seems to add about 0.7 to R.
I see.
It's that much. It doesn't seem to be sort of deadlier. It doesn't seem to have worse symptoms, but it definitely spreads a lot easier. So we could overnight, if this gets into the state, and it will, right? We're going to go from R of 1 to R of 1.7.
Right.
And that's a huge difference.
Right.
Assuming that really happens, the restrictions are going to get broadened.
Wow.
Right?
That's going to be I know it's something a lot of people are considering right now. I know the legislature, as they start up their session here in early January, certainly top of mind for them. So
they're going to be all virtual. Almost entirely
as they
virtual,
look at that.
Right.
Yeah, they have to be at this point.
Right.
So we'll be keeping a close eye on that as well. I wanted to start wrapping up the show here, Kevin, with something we always like to do here. Some good treats to have on your coffee break. I often lean on Kevin's vast knowledge of all things baking here. Kevin, I know you've been baking like a madman over the holidays here. Do you have anything in front of you?
So I got a couple things. One is I made macarons.
Oh, those are tough to make. That's
they're
hats off
work.
to you, sir.
They're work. So yeah, I did some macaron baking with my daughter last night. So these the cookie is chocolate.
Ooh, hold them up there a little more, would you?
I just want to make
there we go.
Some homemade blackberry jam in the inside there, and they're just really nice. Yeah.
Secret to macarons. Briefly, your thoughts on that? How do you make them right?
Oh,
spend a lot of time.
Practice.
Practice.
Yeah. How do you get to Carnegie Hall?
That's right.
Yeah.
3 words.
Same
Practice.
Yeah.
Well, I will say, my daughter has. We got her a book on different Asian cuisine over.
No fun.
She loves it. So she created this Vietnamese honeycomb cake.
Oh,
take a look at that.
Nice. Look at that. That's gorgeous.
Super cool. Yeah. And I sliced open a cross section of it to kind of show you here, but this is something that has no flour in it, but has some tapioca involved too. And some yeast, of course, and it creates this really interesting honeycomb effect. And it's just delicious. There's some coconut milk in there too. This is the good stuff, man. I think I've been eating well over the holidays, and I think you have too. This is
entirely too well. Yeah, I gotta get back next. There's one other very cool thing that
what do you got?
did over the holidays. So there's this local. I'm going to do a plug for a local company here, a World Spice Company, Seattle-based company that sells spices from all over the world. They sell them in packages. It turned out, I gave away a lot of Christmas presents of spice packages from these guys.
Sure.
Look them up; they're great. One of the kits that they sell is a do-it-yourself amaretto.
Whoa. Okay.
So I did it. It took about 3.5, 4 weeks from beginning to end. It basically has to, you mix together some almonds and a bunch of spices with some vodka and brandy.
Yes.
And let it steep in a jar for about 3 weeks, and then you kind of mix together some other things with it. Let it sit for a couple more days. But it is amazing.
I bet. Wow.
Yes.
Happy New Year to you, my man. That sounds awesome.
World Spice Company, and buy do-it-yourself amaretto kit or one of their spice combination packages, or they just have some really great stuff. So if you want to get and including baking spices, right? Really great baking spices as well as cooking spices. So if you're into spending time in the kitchen, or you're into things like amaretto, then I highly recommend them. And it's a local company. We can support our local economy.
Getting spicy with Kevin. That's a whole new show that we got to work on here. Kevin, thank you so much for joining me yet again. Right. We'll see how it goes. All right, folks, next time you want to know what's happening in local politics, make sure you listen to Seattle News, Views, and Brews. Find out what's brewing. You can subscribe on iTunes or Spotify, wherever you listen. And please do support us on Patreon if you like what you're hearing. We really need your help to keep this thing going. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks for watching on Converge Media, and we will see you next time.
Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2021.